Welcome back. Let's continue our discussion on the cost, the impact on employees of scaling a business. At the tail end of the previous video, I talked about the fact that the level of engagement of employees starts to weaken as we go into deeper and deeper into the scaling process. And we'll come back to that, but just take that as a given for the moment. So now I'd like to run into and talk about the high cost of resignations. One of the things that's a factor here, replacing people is an unplanned event. We do not plan for people to quit. So the unbudgeted high cost of replacing employees is drawing cash from other planned uses. So let's take a look at this cost. I like to look at it from an opportunity cost perspective. Opportunity cost is the cost as a benefit lost due to making an alternative choice. So if we apply it to a resignation case, when resignations are unplanned, the opportunity cost of replacing a person that has resigned is the benefit that would have come from the money had it been used for its original use. Keeping in mind, again, that resignations are unplanned. So let's take a look at, so emergency actions are required to fill a job that was not planned to being lost. We have lower productivity due to the vacant job. Thus, you have higher cost. So lower productivity, higher cost. That's logical. There's also this. It is likely the replacement activity is paid at a premium rate because you don't have people sitting on the bench waiting for somebody to quit. So if you have to fill 8 hours of work and you've got 15 people, that's a half an hour of overtime for every person under the assumption that you could actually distribute the work evenly, which is probably not likely. So the filling of a job that's been lost is paid at overtime. Thus, you've got higher costs for lower productivity, and you've got higher costs because you're paying a premium rate. So that's what happens to get started. Now, what does it really take to replace an employee? And I'm going to walk through the basic approach to replacing somebody. So it may obviously be tweaked for one industry versus another or a given situation. But basically, this is the process. And it costs money to do this. Number one, we write a job description. Then we have to place an ad for the open job someplace. We may want to hire an employment agency to hold initial interviews, unless you happen to have an HR department that is there because you got to replace too many people, which is not a good reason for an HR department. So if you hire an employment agency to hold initial interviews, you'll then receive a list of recommendations from the agency. Then you're going to hold some internal interviews, 1 to 3, to work through the list that the employment agency gave you. You're going to consolidate the interviews and select the preferred candidate. Then you're going to make an offer to the candidate. You're going to probably hold an acceptance interview to discuss the next steps. And once that's all done, all that stuff that's been done, now the employee can come to work on day one. So you just spent all that time doing all that preliminary stuff, and the person isn't even in the door yet. Okay, here's day one. And again, this is a basic approach, right? Day one, you have basically an introduction to what's happening in the business and initial training. Days 2 and 3, or however many it takes, you continue the training process. On day 4, or something like that, you may review the progress with measurable KPIs to relay progress to the employee. It's important that the employee can determine if they're doing a good job, not simply because you run up and tell them. They should be able to tell by certain KPIs, time to do something, whatever, so they can determine if they're progressing. Days and weeks into the future, we repeat the above process until the employee is well trained. And it varies by job, obviously. But we need to get up to full productivity so that we can create the value that was created before the employee left. But how long does this really take? Now, this next set of information these are average numbers for the United States. You obviously will be plus or minus, but the averages are scary. The average length of time to bring a new person up to full productivity, full knowledge, as if you hadn't lost anybody, 7.5 months. The average cost of those 7.5 months is $34,000. So what have we just done? We've calculated the activities, time, and cost necessary to respond to losing an employee due to a resignation. Get this next piece, that we should have never lost in the first place. And why is that? Because employees flee managers, they don't flee companies. When an employee quits, they're leaving the person they report to. There's no question about this. If they're leaving for a negative reason, if they're leaving because they're going on to better themselves, that happens. I'd rather not lose those people. But you know what? They're aces while you have them. So we have to be thankful for what they've done. But when somebody quits because they're stagnant and they don't want to be there anymore, they're fleeing the manager. Let's take a look at turnover. The average turnover rate in the United States is 9.3%. If you took a look at what the 9.3% is made up of, if all you ever lost were people that were retiring, that'd be about 2.3% of the workforce. And those are planned events because we know when people are retiring. So we can prepare, right? Those that leave for self-improvement, which is the one I just referenced. When you have somebody on your team and you're helping them develop and they choose to move on because you can't provide for them what they're looking for any longer, then those people are going to move on. That's a positive reason for losing somebody. They've been successful with you and they're moving on. So the rest, that's about 1.7%, give or take. That means there's 5.3% lost by the manager. If we lose 5.3% of our people because they're lost by the manager, a 100-member organization would spend $178,900 per year replacing people that should have never been lost. I can think that there's something better to do with that $178,000, like what it was originally intended for. A 1,000-member organization will cost $1.8 million spent replacing people they shouldn't have lost. So why is this such a surprise when examined? It's because the impact of this is buried in the income statement, as I said once before. So it's important. Do you know your employee resignation replacement cost? You can't afford not to know that number. But there is a better way. In our next video, we're going to talk about creating an environment with actions that secure a high level of engagement. In the next subsequent videos, we're going to talk about training that creates leaders instead of managers. And then what I think is one of the most important pieces of this thing, I can give you all this through a series of videos. You can watch it all, take it all in, that's all good. But unless you do something with it, it's simply a listening exercise. So we'll talk about that as well. But for tomorrow, or I should say the next video, we're going to talk about creating an environment that secures a high level of engagement. We'll see you then.